أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah. Who studied Ibn Ashur before? Anybody else? Ibn Ashur has 3 sections. We'll start with the section on Juristic Principles. But before I do that, just a few things about who's actually practicing. Is everybody consider themselves Maliki? Everybody? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit first about the madhabs, and then particularly Malik's madhab, and what the distinctive qualities of his madhab are. First of all, the basis of the religion is obviously revelation. So the Prophet ﷺ had a revelation which wasn't just the Quran, because he said, "Utitul Quran wa mithluhu." I was given the Quran and I was given the likes of the Quran, which is the Sunnah, or his. Generally, the ulama use Sunnah and Hadith to be synonymous, but the Malikis actually differentiate between Sunnah and Hadith. They don't consider the Hadith Sunnah, so to speak. The Sunnah is specifically practice, and some of the practice was transmitted through practice. It wasn't transmitted through Hadith. So Imam Malik, the practice of the people of Medina, he considered it to be Sunnah, even though there wasn't a Hadith necessarily relating it. I'll give you an example. There's a Hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ prohibited fasting on Friday. But Imam Malik found the people in Medina, the ulama of Medina, fasting on Friday. So he said, I'm not going to take one hadith, an isolated hadith, and leave the actions of the ulama of this city, because they were doing this in front of the Sahaba, and they probably took it from the Sahaba, and the Sahaba didn't say, oh, the Prophet said don't fast. So if there was a solitary hadith, and there weren't a lot of people that related it, Imam Malik just did not consider, because the hadith, there's a vast number of hadith, and many of the hadith are not, they have no application at all. And there's a lot of fabricated hadith. The potential for a hadith to enter into the corpus, even if it has a sound matan, is still not real high, but it's there. The probability is there, and it's actually a reasonable probability. It's not an outrageous probability. So that's why there's a great rigor in how the fuqaha look at the hadith. The fuqaha have a completely different attitude towards the hadith that the muhaddithun have. And Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu is a good example of that, where he rejected many absolutely verified sound hadiths because they went against certain principles. And this is where the nuance of the nuanced understanding of the fuqaha really comes into confrontation with the simplistic understanding of people that preach the book and the sunnah. You know, there's certain people now. There's always been that strain historically in the Muslim community, but there are people who say we should just follow the book and the sunnah, as if somehow these previous people weren't doing that. They were doing something else. But when you get into the deeper you study this, the more you realize that not only were they following the book and the sunnah, but following the book and the sunnah is not as simple as it would outwardly appear, especially in light of language and the multiple possibilities for meaning and how meaning is interpreted in language, and also the fact that there are contradictory hadiths, which the Muslims have never denied, and there are abrogated hadiths, there are abrogating hadiths, and then there are questions that arose that different fuqaha resolve them in different ways. Does a mutawatir hadith abrogate a verse in the Quran, for instance? So, what is the relationship to the Quran and the Sunnah? These are all problems that were examined early on in the community's history. So when you look at the schools, certain schools arose very early on. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, it was known if people wanted an easy fatwa, they went to Ibn Abbas. If they wanted a hard fatwa, they went to Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. So even in Medina, there was an acknowledgement of different approaches to the text. Ibn Abbas reflects more the Bani Hashim approach, and Ibn Umar reflects more his father's approach, Umar ibn al-Khattab. The Prophet ﷺ said, if there was a prophet after me, it would have been Umar radiallahu anhu. So, and he also said that if Umar took a path, Shaitan would take another path. Umar is the only one that had what are called the muwafaqat, where he was of the opinion of something, and then the revelation would actually affirm his opinion. And in a few instances, it actually confirmed his opinion in contradistinction to the Prophet's opinion about something, from taking the advice of the Sahaba. The Prophet listened to them, and then he took the advice, and Umar radiallahu anhu's advice turned out to be in accordance with the revelation. So, a lot of people now, unfortunately, view the madhabs as that they're somehow not following the book and the sunnah. And so they call people to directly going back to the sources. And the problem with that, the central problem is this. In order to access the source material, you have to have a vast amount of ancillary knowledge. If you don't have that knowledge, you're just not going to be able to study these sources. The first criterion is just Arabic mastery. And Arabic mastery is doesn't mean you speak Arabic or that you can read or write Arabic. Arabic mastery takes many, many years, and even today it's questionable whether anybody could really master the Arabic in the way that it was mastered in that early period, because they were in direct contact with people that understood these things immediately. So Imam Fairuz Abadi said, and many of the scholars of grammar say, لا يحيط بالعربية إلا نبي. Nobody will encompass the Arabic language except a prophet. And nobody, even some of the ulama of language said that nobody in the history of Islam has ever claimed to know all of Arabic. Nobody's ever made that claim in the history of Islam, to actually know all of Arabic. So the language is vast. There are many, many points. There's a lot of differences of opinion about prepositions in the Quran, what prepositions mean. And I'll give you a couple of examples to show you just about how they arrive at different things. One of them is, there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever fasts Ramadan and then follows it up, atba'uhu, with 6 days of Shawwal, right? So people know that, right? It's a good thing to fast 6 days of Shawwal. What he said, min Shawwal, and used min in the hadith that Ibn Majah relates. And that hadith is one of the hadiths that's used by the fuqaha. But Imam Shafi'i understood the min to be min at-tab'id, because there's a type of min, like akaltu min al-khubz, I ate from the bread. So it means akaltu ba'dan min al-khubz, I ate some of the bread. That's min. There's also min al-ibtida or min al-bayan. There are different types of min in language. So like you say, nunaziru min al-Quran. In the Quran it says nunaziru min al-Quran. That's min, means the whole Quran. It's just a min yubayyinu ma yunazziru minhu, like that. It just clarifies what's being revealed. So the min there is actually a type of min that you could just take it out and you'll still have the meaning. Nunazzil al-Quran. Then you have like min al-ibtida, ataytu min Makkata, I came from Mecca. These are all different types of one preposition in Arabic. And so in that hadith, Imam Shafi'i said that it was tab'id. The min was tab'id. And so you had to fast in Shawwal. Imam Malik said the min is for ibtida. It means beginning with Shawwal. Whoever follows up 6 days beginning in Shawwal. If they follow up Ramadan with 6 days, then they, then they get then they get the reward as if they fasted the whole year. So that's an example where the imams are looking at the identical nas, the same nas. That's called a nas. They're looking at the same nas and they come to different conclusions. Completely. One says you can fast any time during the year and you get that reward. The other says no, you have to fast specifically in that month. Those are two valid opinions. Now, this went on with many, many things in the Sharia. There are many examples of this, about these very subtle linguistic differences. For instance, in the Quran it says biru'usikum, when it says that you famsahu biru'usikum, like wipe your heads. The ba there, according to Imam Shafi'i, was ba of tab'id. Right? It meant the ba of part of something, partitive. So Imam Shafi'i said you could just do a little bit, based on his linguistic understanding. Imam Malik said, "Laysa min al-Arabiyya ba'a tab'id." You know, there's no ba'a tab'id in Arabic. That was his opinion. But Imam Shafi'i was a master of Arabic, so his opinion's as valid as Imam Malik in that, because they're at the same level in terms of their ijtihad. So Imam Malik said the ba there is za'ida. It's an extra ba, which there are many examples of that in the Arabic language. So Imam Malik said it meant you have to wipe the whole head, not part of the head. That's an example, same text, different conclusion. So who do you follow? Well, on a lot of these things, they have equal authority. Now there are other ones where it would appear one opinion is stronger than the other. But generally, the madhabs, because of the human nature, each madhab will consider their opinion to be stronger than the other. That's human nature, and that's where you can get into stupidity. There's no doubt about that. That's where the madhabs can become like tribes or clans or gangs. You know, and that has happened historically, but that's a human problem. It's not a problem of the madhabs per se. That's just a human problem. So to blame that on the madhabs, as opposed to blaming on a human nature, is like claiming that religion is the cause of all wars. When in the 20th century, all the wars were fought over secularity. So man just needs a certain set of circumstances to find an excuse to go to war. So you can't blame war on any specific thing. You blame war on human nature. You don't blame war on, he said that, that's why we went to war. That's not why you went to war. You know, we didn't go to war in Iraq for oil. But that's what people say. You know, we went to war in Iraq, this country did, there's human nature, greed, whatever the reasons are. But essentially, human nature is the problem. And that's why within the madhabs, human nature is the problem. So you can't blame the madhab for the problems that have arisen that involve the madhab. And that's why the uqala, the people of understanding, don't have that. So, you know, there was a time when certain scholars, and this is what, they use these arguments against madhab. There was a time when certain scholars in the Hanafi madhab said that you couldn't marry a Shafi'i woman. Right? The Hanafis couldn't marry. Why? Because they said, they're not certain about their faith. Right? Or vice versa. The Shafi'is, they're not certain about their faith. And that happened. There's people that had that opinion. That's not a madhab problem. That wasn't Hanafis and Shafi'is. That was Maturidis and Ash'aris. Right? Because the Maturidis, to them, faith is a hal of a person, and with the Ash'aris, it's more of a maqam. In other words, the Maturidis believe that you can be a believer and then leave faith. Whereas the Ash'aris say no, faith is, even if you're in a state of disbelief, you're a believer with God. And that's why you can say, if somebody says, are you a believer? You say, I'm a believer, insha'Allah. Well, the Maturidis say that's doubt. You're doubting your faith. It's just semantics, because he's not doubting his faith. He's just doubting whether or not he'll die with that faith. He doesn't know. But the Maturidis say, no, you have to say you're a believer, and you know you're a believer, because if you have doubt in your faith, That's an example of mediocre ulama fighting over a semantic issue and creating problem. Is that a problem of Maturidis, Ash'aris? No, it's a problem of just excuses to fight. And that's why you can't take a lot of these things seriously. Personally, I can't take them seriously. I mean, most of this stuff is just human folly. And you have to be like the man in the, when you have a projector in the old days when I was growing up, in the movies, you had a man sitting in the back, you could see him, right, running the projector. Now it's all computerized, but in those days you had a man in the back, and he was always reading a book during the movie, right? He wasn't entertained, because he'd seen the movie so many times. And that, in essence, is what you have to get with human nature, is just like, this is a rerun. These are just reruns. They're uninteresting. So all this fighting and, oh, he's a bid'i and he's a... people have been doing this for 1,400 years. At a certain point, you just have to see it as an uninteresting scenario. Like, I've seen this movie before, or I've read about it before. It's just not interesting. And people that get caught up in these things, it's what's in their hearts. It's because they're enjoying it. It's exciting, and, people get excited about fitna. And they get energy that they didn't have normally. Like, they don't have the energy to do good, but when it comes to fitna, they'll start staying up late at night and, writing their blogs and doing... It's just amazing the type of energy that people get.